"Be prepared" served as the Boy Scouts' motto. Their code mandated traits like trustworthiness, loyalty, helpfulness, friendliness, courtesy, kindness, obedience, cheerfulness, thriftiness, bravery, cleanliness, and reverence. Strangely, naivety, stupidity, idiocy, and trust seemed part of the package. Nick had no other solutions. He rarely snooped on his wife's iPhone, a fact she knew, so she skipped extra security. Being a Boy Scout, he valued honesty and respected privacy. However, with his wife's upcoming trip, Nick struggled to recall her hotel's name, hoping to dodge a potential argument about his forgetfulness, a recurring issue lately. Their imminent separation, the longest since their wedding 5 years ago, prompted Nick's thoughts of romantic gestures like sending flowers. Yet, Paris, the city of love, held a bitter irony. He wouldn't be her love interest there. Dwayne, her trip companion, would. Using their wedding date as the passcode, Nick found himself perusing work-safe emails exchanged between his wife and Dwayne, detailing romantic plans in Paris. Equally surprising as the affair itself was the use of work emails by Nick's wife Linda and her lover Dwayne, both legal professionals. They, like Nick, should have known better. Linda was a lawyer, and Dwayne worked as a paralegal at her firm. Their shared experience in document handling and litigation exposed them to countless emails, often uncovering affairs. Lawyers would then assess if these were pertinent and how to minimize damage. Nick hadn't paid much attention to Linda's trip details or the hotel's name due to a troubling feeling. His legal experience sharpened his intuition and listening skills. Something felt off when Linda mentioned the trip initially, describing it as a mundane arbitration case that would leave no time for sightseeing without meeting Nick's gaze. Her casual demeanor contrasted with their shared dream of visiting Paris. Nick discovered her response to be odd, catching him off guard with the worst-case scenario he hadn't foreseen. An email subject line struck him deeply. "Why don't you just lose the Boy Scout so we can spend more time together and not worry?" This was Dwayne's recent message, countered by Linda's unsettling assurance. "I feel safe with him." Nick, feeling a mix of betrayal and arousal, typed out his response, followed by a smiley face emoji. Unsure of his next move, he opted to print the email using the Wi-Fi printer in the basement, viewing it as a precautionary step. Given his experience as a seasoned lawyer, his primary concern was to preserve evidence by printing and stashing the email in his computer bag. Taking a moment to think, Nick devised a plan. He saw it as a win-win situation. He contemplated feigning a romantic gesture toward Linda, only to abruptly collide his face with one of the trees in the woods behind their house. Conversely, Dwayne, he reckoned, would show less mercy in a similar situation. Nick needed to strategize carefully. It was his capacity for strategic thinking that defined him as a lawyer. Paid for his intellect, not his physical prowess, Nick had to act swiftly, knowing Linda would soon return from her run. But before delving into deep thought, he had tasks to complete, finishing an assignment and securing a hotel booking, though not for sending flowers. He wasn't sure why he needed the hotel information, but he felt a sense of purpose in obtaining it. He located La Clef Tourfel, near the Trocadero, a short walk from the International Chamber of Commerce, where Linda and Dwayne would be involved in their arbitration case. During the lovers' anticipated breaks from their hotel trysts, Nick hurriedly researched Virginia's divorce laws, drawing from his memories of the bar exam 5 years prior. Infidelity, he recalled, was grounds for divorce and could impact alimony and property division. Yet, there were defenses against infidelity charges, such as reconciliation. He needed to vacate the house swiftly, avoiding confrontation for now. His intention was to stun Linda into disbelief, employing a strategic approach akin to shock and awe to terminate the marriage. Lies would be necessary, despite their inconsistency with Scout law. This was war. As Winston Churchill famously said, "In war, truth is so precious that it must be accompanied by a bodyguard of lies." Nick saw his lies as serving a greater purpose now, unbound by oath. Returning to the bedroom, Nick swiftly packed his belongings, placing the suitcases by the front door. He then gathered essential documents: bank statements, credit card statements, retirement accounts, car paperwork, pay stubs, mortgage statements, and Linda's latest student loan balance. Upon hearing Linda in the kitchen upon her return from her run, Nick put on a concerned expression as he ascended from his basement office. Seeing her drinking Gatorade with her brown hair tied back, he couldn't deny her attractiveness, though he found her actions despicable. Nick came to the realization that love was no longer alive. He conveyed his plans to go to Paris with a somber smile. Linda's reaction was immediate, her complexion turning pale, her blue eyes losing their usual vibrancy. She questioned him about the destination, her initial shock fading quickly. Nick explained that Sven had called, informing him of the need to prepare a witness for his insurance case. He mentioned the judge's frustration over a lost motion to compel, which had disrupted the court schedule. Nick anticipated being on the road for a few weeks, but hinted at the possibility of stopping by occasionally for laundry. Linda expressed sympathy, suggesting that perhaps Nick's firm was hiring. Nick expressed a desire to join her in Paris, noticing a flicker of worry on her face before she teased him about sending his resume. Despite Linda's law school having a higher ranking than Nick's, she made a motion as if to hug him, but he avoided her and headed downstairs to his office, battling visions of punching her and struggling to keep them in check. As Linda asked about dinner plans, Nick explained that he couldn't stay and would grab something on the road, as Sven was eager for him to leave immediately. Linda followed him to the door, looking slightly concerned as he picked up his suitcases and left. She declined a goodbye kiss, citing a sore throat and the possibility of a cold or allergies, expressing concern about him catching anything from her. Nick informed her that he wouldn't be back until Friday at the earliest, mentioning their upcoming stops in Roanoke and Baltimore. He couldn't shake the feeling that Linda was considering the unexpected possibilities his absence might bring. He waved farewell and drove off. He hoped she'd assume he was preoccupied with work and irritated about being called in on a Saturday. His acting skills were limited to that extent, but he suspected she was already planning to reach out to Dwayne. Nick drove until he reached the nearest shopping center with a coffee shop. Like many lawyers, he found clarity through pen and paper. As he sipped his coffee, he began listing cases. It struck him that he had never considered reconciliation, not even as an option. Retribution was the only path forward. The question was to what extent. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted by the sound of a ringing phone, originating from an unfamiliar number. With impatience, he answered, only to be greeted by Sam Granger on the other end. Granger swiftly introduced himself as someone in the business of purchasing old houses to replace them with McMansions, acknowledging the general disapproval of his work, but emphasizing the allure of receiving a substantial check. Nick found himself taken aback by the notion of tearing down their cozy home. However, he soon regained his composure as Granger proposed buying their house for demolition, citing the uncertainty of new construction timelines and offering a potentially lucrative deal if Nick and his wife were willing to sell. Nick couldn't help but smirk at the prospect, recalling how Linda had chosen the house shortly before their wedding. It was a ranch nestled in a serene setting, complete with a charming yard overlooking woods and a creek, with the added appeal of a treehouse visible from the bedroom window, a symbol of their envisioned family life. Nick found the location convenient, with easy access to major highways and a manageable commute to work. Informing Granger of his busy schedule in the coming days, Nick arranged to meet on Sunday morning. Granger assured him that he had already assessed the property from the outside and didn't require access to the interior. Additionally, he mentioned that he would likely handle the closing himself through a power of attorney for his wife, who was occupied with work. As they finalized the details, Nick couldn't help but ponder Linda's perceived security with her Boy Scout. Unbeknownst to her, Nick reflected, the ideals of the Boy Scouts were rooted in military scouting, emphasizing skills such as stealth and self-reliance. It was a realization that Linda had unknowingly walked into a trap, reminiscent of a military ambush. But before taking further action, Nick resolved to conduct reconnaissance. With his plan in mind, he deliberately knocked over his empty coffee cup and stepped out to his car for privacy. Dialing a number on his cell phone, then another, he waited for a response, eventually connecting with Frank Berry, a former private investigator Nick had collaborated with during his time as a corporate lawyer. Frank had often assisted with pro bono legal cases, a reflection of Nick's commitment to public service. Nick recounted the urgent favor he needed, explaining the situation involving his wife and another man. Frank expressed disbelief at the audacity of Nick's wife and offered to handle the matter himself, as a token of gratitude for Nick's past assistance in the Rivera divorce case, which had garnered significant publicity. Nick thanked Frank and proceeded to provide details about the house in the backyard, mentioning its direct access to the bedroom where his wife practiced martial arts with the curtains open. He suggested that Frank could use it for surveillance purposes, accessible by traversing the woods and leaping over the creek after dark. Nick also mentioned his intention to set up a camera outside aimed at the front of the house to monitor activities. After finalizing arrangements with Frank, Nick contacted Harry, a lawyer he intended to retain for his divorce proceedings. Despite Harry's initial confusion about the purpose of the call, Nick clarified that he needed legal representation due to his wife's infidelity. Following Nick's briefing, Harry suggested meeting the next day to begin working on the case, acknowledging the need to gather clear evidence of infidelity and navigate the complexities of the financial settlement, given his wife's resources and support from colleagues at her firm. Nick conveyed his assurance that he would handle the situation, expressing confidence in resolving it amicably. His next interaction involved a discussion about potential retaliation, to which Nick responded that he was not planning to retaliate, opting for a wait-and-see approach. For his final call, Nick reached out to Maggie, employing tact in his approach. After some initial silence, Maggie expressed pleasure at hearing from him after so long, prompting Nick to request her assistance, mentioning Linda's recent behavior. Maggie explained that Linda's actions had driven a wedge between them, but she expressed willingness to help Nick as a friend. Nick then shared his plan with her. After a brief moment of silence, Maggie responded with laughter, indicating her amusement at the situation. She agreed to assist Nick, acknowledging his ability to make her laugh. Nick expressed gratitude to Maggie, promising to treat her and her partner to dinner once things settled down. Maggie accepted the invitation, confirming it as a date. Needing seclusion to strategize, Nick found lodging at an extended stay hotel outside Fairfax's Beltway, far from their usual haunts. Settling in, he ventured out for sustenance. Although not hungry, he knew he needed food to counter the drinks he intended to consume. The nearby restaurant, El Mariachi, sufficed, despite the complimentary chips and cheese likely causing discomfort. Seated in a booth, he noticed the bartender's gaze but pushed aside the thought, preoccupied with his concerns. Noticing pupusas on the menu hinted at the restaurant's Central American influence masquerading as Mexican. Unfazed, Nick ordered tequila, anticipating a brutal hangover the next day as part of the ordeal. The waitress returned with top-shelf tequila and a glass, gesturing toward the bartender, who acknowledged him. Pouring himself a generous serving, Nick recalled the bartender from Rivera's legal proceedings, always sitting alone in the last row. Dining in silence, he made notes and drank tequila. After clearing his plates, he visited the break room, feeling the surroundings sway like a ship. Returning to the booth, he found the bartender occupying the opposite bench, awaiting him. The bartender greeted Nick warmly, expressing gratitude for Nick's assistance in helping his cousin escape an abusive marriage. Despite Nick's attempt to downplay his involvement, the bartender continued, mentioning that his cousin's abusive husband had been severely injured in jail, potentially facing permanent damage. Nick was taken aback by the news, feeling a chill run down his spine as the bartender relayed the information with a slight smile. Nick replied that he hadn't been aware of the extent of the husband's injuries, to which the bartender nonchalantly remarked that it was yesterday's news. Curious about Nick's presence alone on a Saturday night, the bartender inquired about his wife's whereabouts, noting Nick's marital status with a knowing smile. Nick realized that the bartender must have witnessed an unexpected encounter between him and Linda at a hearing, followed by a kiss. Admitting to some marital issues, including Linda's potential infidelity, Nick saw no reason to conceal the truth. The bartender responded with a familiar smile, suggesting that while he might not be a lawyer, he understood the importance of keeping secrets and hinted at Nick's exposed notebook, containing incriminating details and a to-do list. Nick shrugged off the security lapse, noting that at least no client secrets had been compromised. The bartender questioned Nick about his desires aside from money, suggesting the possibility of seeking revenge. Nick expressed his desire to physically damage his wife, wanting to break her nose and blacken her eyes. The bartender cautioned Nick against such violent retaliation, reminding him of the potential consequences that could lead to jail time. Nick agreed, nodding in acknowledgement. Acknowledging Nick's past assistance to his cousin, despite her initial refusal of help, the bartender insisted on repaying the debt owed to Nick. Nick attempted to interject, mentioning Frank's role in gathering evidence and the police's involvement in the case. He also enlisted a partner from his firm to ensure proper handling of the criminal proceedings, accompanying his client to ensure respectful treatment by prosecutors. Despite Nick's objections, the bartender commended his efforts in assisting those in need and offered his assistance in return. When Nick expressed uncertainty about the bartender's identity, the bartender revealed himself as Jose Garcia, also known as El Diablo to some. Nick jokingly asked if he had to sell his soul for a favor, to which El Diablo responded with a chuckle, stating it was merely professional courtesy. El Diablo then instructed Nick to provide his address, his wife's name, and her daily routine. He suggested getting a cell phone for easier communication and leaving a contact number at the bar. El Diablo advised Nick not to return to the bar, claiming it was for the best. Nick briefed El Diablo about hiring a private investigator, his intention to stay home until Linda's departure for France, and Linda's travel plans. El Diablo knew the location of the Paris hotel, but kept the method of obtaining the information vague. "Just one question, Senor Nick. Is there any chance of reconciliation, forgiveness, mercy? I don't want doubts later," El Diablo queried, his smile replaced by a serious expression. Nick met his gaze. Nick took a deep breath, reflecting on his emotions. The path ahead was clear. Trust and loyalty were fundamental to him, lacking in his marriage. Linda's actions had turned love into hate in his heart. While he might eventually become indifferent, that time had not yet arrived. "No," Nick affirmed. El Diablo visibly relaxed. "Okay, don't fret." When the waitress presented the bill, El Diablo dismissed her, but allowed Nick to tip generously. He also permitted Nick to take a bottle of tequila, advising him to use it carefully. Nick woke up Sunday morning without much of a hangover, arriving at Harry's law office at 10 to find Frank already there. Frank conveyed his findings, informing Nick that Linda was indeed with another man in their bed. He handed Nick a DVD containing evidence of their infidelity, cautioning against watching it. Harry expressed concern about Nick's decisions, but Nick requested a summary of the evidence. Frank recounted how he had observed Linda and the man, Dwayne Martin, engaging in coital activity in the treehouse as Nick had suggested. They had identified Dwayne Martin as Linda's partner and planned to draft a report and affidavit for Harry to file, expressing regret for the situation. Nick decided to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but requested that Linda not be served immediately. He instructed Harry to file the paperwork on Monday afternoon before the clerk's office closed. Harry reminded Nick of his limitations in criminal law, cautioning that he wouldn't be able to help if Nick got into legal trouble. "You'll be pleasantly surprised," Nick mentioned as he exited. His next destination was a meeting with Sam Granger. It turned out to be an exceptionally productive session where Nick discovered they could sell the house for over $100 more than the mortgage and without any commission to the real estate agent. Linda would be thrilled. Nick assured Sam that he'd have all the necessary paperwork ready to close the deal promptly. After leaving Sam's office, Nick checked his phone. No messages, no calls. She must still be occupied with Dwayne. Nick seized the opportunity to call his boss, Sven, urgently requesting 2 weeks of vacation or he'd resign. Sven, realizing Nick's pivotal role in the ongoing case, hastily agreed. Luckily, there was a lull in Sven's workload, allowing Nick some leeway. With the groundwork laid, Nick returned to the hotel to dive into the real work. By Monday evening, he was fully prepared. Throughout Sunday night and Monday, Linda left voice messages that he didn't respond to. He was conserving all his energy for Tuesday morning. Thanks to Frank's strategically placed camera outside the house, Nick knew Dwayne had spent Monday night there. Estimating Dwayne's departure for work around 8 a.m. and Linda's at 8:30 a.m., Nick planned his move. At 7 a.m., Nick entered through the front door, cheerfully announcing, "Honey, I'm home." He heard sharp footsteps upstairs, and then Linda came down the stairs in her robe, disheveled and shocked. Linda greeted Nick, attempting to sound cheerful, but appearing exhausted and panicked. Nick apologized for his unexpected return, attributing it to the nature of business trips. He ignored the wine glasses in the living room and headed straight to the dining room, where he began arranging papers on the table. Meanwhile, Linda, fearing Nick's discovery of Dwayne upstairs, hesitated before answering a knock at the door. Nick asked her to handle it as he continued with his task. To Linda's surprise, it was Maggie who entered and greeted them. Linda observed as Maggie joined them at the dining table and opened her briefcase. Nick explained that he had arranged for financial and medical preparations for Linda's upcoming overseas trip due to his busy schedule. He also mentioned securing a refinancing offer for their mortgage and apologized for the short notice. Linda relaxed upon realizing that Maggie was a notary. Commenting on Nick's preparedness, Linda joked about him being her Boy Scout, though her cautious demeanor remained. Nick handed her a pen, pointing out where to sign on the documents and encouraging her to take her time reading them. Expressing her trust in Nick, Linda swiftly signed all the documents before her. Nick hoped her trust was genuine as he handed each paper to Maggie for notarization. Maggie asked for Linda's photo ID, prompting Linda to retrieve her driver's license. Maggie photographed it and recorded the information in her notary journal, while Nick and Maggie exchanged glances, trying to suppress their amusement. Linda offered coffee, but both Nick and Maggie declined. As Maggie documented the notarized papers and Nick sorted them into folders, Linda glanced up, anticipating Nick's next move and planning hers. Once Maggie left, discreetly stowing her tools, she smiled at Nick when Linda wasn't looking. Nick gave Linda a reprieve, citing a need for a teleconference and retreating to his basement office. Linda's shoulders relaxed. For now, she'd have time to usher Dwayne out and erase any trace of his presence before Nick emerged from his sanctuary. Nick descended to maintain the illusion that Linda was still deceiving him. He feigned ignorance to Dwayne's footsteps and the garage door opening as Dwayne's car departed, but upon hearing the shower running in the master bath, Nick gathered his belongings, exited through the basement door, and drove away without a word to his unsuspecting wife. 2 hours later, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, Nick found himself in Harry's office. Harry looked shocked. Nick affirmed to Harry that his wife had signed the necessary forms consenting to the divorce petition and waiving service of court notices. He confirmed that the forms were properly notarized. Nick also stated that his wife had agreed to a property division agreement, granting him all proceeds from the house sale, her cars, and jewelry, leaving him full discretion over her belongings, with both parties retaining their respective retirement accounts without any alimony from him. When questioned about his wife's financial situation, Nick responded that she earns more than him anyway. Harry reviewed the documents, noting that Nick's wife agreed to exit the marriage with minimal assets and significant debt. Nick confirmed the accuracy of the information, attributing it to his wife's generosity. Harry briefly scrutinized Nick before returning his attention to the papers on his desk. Nick further confirmed that his wife had signed an affidavit admitting to infidelity, acknowledging her lover's presence in the marital bedroom at the time of signing, and affirming the authenticity of email correspondence discussing their affair. Nick asserted that the documents spoke for themselves. Harry, initially appearing surprised, eventually smiled, recognizing Nick's respected reputation and their friendship from law school. He decided to proceed with filing the documents, admitting that everything appeared legitimate to him and expressing disbelief at Nick's actions. Nick expressed immense embarrassment to the judge, acknowledging that he had been consumed by his client's breach of trust. He mentioned that if anyone deserved disbarment, it would be himself. The judge then discussed with Nick whether the notary could confirm Linda's signature on the documents and if Linda scrutinized them. Nick affirmed that he was confident Linda had thoroughly assessed the documents due to her experience as a seasoned litigator. Harry indicated that he would file all the necessary documents that day, including Frank's affidavit and report, along with photos and a DVD. He mentioned his intention to keep the DVD out of the electronic file for the time being to avoid making headlines. Nick agreed, emphasizing the importance of keeping things quiet, especially with Linda's impending departure for Paris in just over 2 weeks. Harry asked Nick if he knew anyone at the county courthouse, mentioning Seth, a classmate from the following year, who was now clerking there to boost his resume. Harry suggested that Seth might expedite the legal process, but cautioned that if the judge demanded live testimony, the case could collapse. He noted that Linda would need to decide whether to contest fraud on the court once she understood the situation. Harry mentioned that if things soured, he might have to part ways with Nick's representation. Nick acknowledged Harry's points and agreed to discuss the matter further someday, but not at that moment. Frank couldn't determine if they met elsewhere during the week or at the office, but it wasn't at home. He promised to update Nick if anything changed. Nick made some discreet moves while Linda was away, returning to the house to collect necessary financial documents and signing a contract to sell the house to Sam Granger, with the sale scheduled for Linda's first week in France. During this time, Nick focused on self-care, hitting the gym, indulging in leisurely reading, and reflecting on the state of his life by age 30. Frank reported the following Saturday that Linda was back with Dwayne at the house. Nick thanked him for the update, expressing his indifference. He noted that once the house was sold, he would rather burn the sheets than sell them. By then, Nick had watched the video Frank had given him. Dwayne, a few years younger, was a gym enthusiast, constantly admiring himself in the mirror post-workout. Otherwise, he was unremarkable. Nick was in decent shape but lacked a chiseled physique. Linda evidently sought arm candy. Nick had no time for such superficiality. Before he knew it, Linda was off to Paris. A private investigator trailed her to the airport, confirming her departure for Europe. Nick then cleared out Linda's belongings, packed what he wanted, and had movers transport everything to a storage facility. Thanks to Sam Granger's adept selling skills, Nick easily offloaded the furniture. When the house was finally devoid of belongings, Nick did one final sweep before his last task. He meticulously collected the wedding photos, album, and Linda's gown. Carrying them to the patio fire pit beneath the treehouse, he carefully arranged the photos and album on the embers, adding lighter fluid to the dress before igniting a match. As everything turned to ash, Nick was gratified to note the intricate details captured in the video, even discerning each photo's nuances as they merged with the flames. A day later, Nick finalized the sale of the marital home, utilizing his wife's power of attorney to sign on her behalf, though she really should have reviewed the documents. With a separate financial power of attorney, Nick deposited the proceeds from the house sale into his personal account, certifying on behalf of his wife and closing joint accounts 3 days later. However, during Linda's initial week in France, a construction crew demolished the house. Several days later, the rubble was cleared and site preparations commenced. Unfortunately, the tree supporting the treehouse, beloved by the children, had to be removed to make way for a planned gazebo. However, construction abruptly ceased with only a bare plot remaining due to an issue in the permitting process. Nick and a friend from law school, employed in the county permit office, remained optimistic that the matter would be resolved upon Linda's return from France, pending proper form approvals. Throughout this time, Nick avoided all communication attempts from Linda, offering evasive responses to inquiries. El Diablo informed him of Linda and Dwayne's apparent stress, hinting that Linda might suspect something was amiss. When asked about Linda's rings, Nick declined, leading El Diablo to suggest another potential recipient. Nick readily agreed. 2 days before Linda's expected return, Nick received the divorce decree unexpectedly swiftly from Harry's office. Departing, he received a call from El Diablo advising him to take a public vacation. Following the advice, he visited New York, reconnecting with college friends, engaging in various activities mostly funded by credit cards. He ensured recognition by staff through generous tipping at the hotel. While there, he overnight mailed a DVD to Linda's parents' house, showing him burning her wedding dress and album. Late one Sunday night, after Nick enjoyed coffee and cake in Little Italy, Manhattan, his phone rang. It was his father-in-law. "Nick, where are you?" "Linda's in the hospital. She's going crazy." "Yeah, what's wrong with her?" It was getting more and more interesting. "She returned from a business trip on Friday, but she and a colleague were apparently kidnapped at the airport. They were under medication and were only able to get out this morning. The co-worker was smacked nearly to pass away, and Linda..." "Here." Her father's voice trembled. Once upon a time, Nick might have sympathized what happened to Linda. When she woke up, she discovered she was covered head to toe in tattoos. Tattoos with horrible inscriptions, like that she was a strumpet and a loose woman. And as soon as she woke up and saw that, some guy in a mask came in and punched her in the nose, breaking it, and then gave her 2 black eyes. Impressive, Nick thought. Really, it was the cherry on top of the ice cream. He would have been happy if Linda had realized that he had betrayed her in court, just as she had betrayed him in marriage. But this was just a rainbow pleasure of joy. It would be worth an immortal soul if he could give it away. "I'm sorry to hear that." Nick informed his father-in-law over the phone that he was out of town and inquired what he should do regarding Linda's situation. His father-in-law expressed surprise, reminding Nick that Linda was his wife. Nick then revealed that they were divorced as of last week and accused Linda of cheating on him with the man she was traveling with. Despite sensing his own cruelty, Nick offered to send his father-in-law a copy of the video as evidence. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Nick speculated if his father-in-law was in shock. Eventually, his father-in-law declared that they were done with Linda, indicating that Nick would have to take care of her. After a moment of shouting, his father-in-law hung up, leaving Nick to ponder their strained relationship. It occurred to Nick at that moment that the stress of city life had been too much lately. He sent Sven an email saying that Sven and the firm could go to hell respectfully, after all. A quick internet search revealed that there was an REI store in Soho, and Nick got himself some new hiking and camping gear. Linda had never liked camping, so this was a chance to reconnect with her. Scouting past the hotel was very accommodating and agreed to leave his luggage for a while for a reasonable fee. And Nick was on his way to the Adirondack Mountains to commune with nature until things calmed down. Luckily, he had his passport with him in case he had time to travel to Canada, and it turned out he did have time. For most of the next 8 weeks, he turned his phone off. At first, he thought some crazy woman had stolen his ex-wife's phone because there were dozens, if not hundreds, of messages that seemed to include frantic screaming and crying. He only listened to 1 or 2 and deleted the rest. Lots of crazy emails, too. Her account must have been hacked. How could he have taken the time to read all this? He hoped that whoever this crazy woman was, she would get the help she so desperately needed. 8 weeks later, Nick met Frank for a drink. Harry was there too. Harry informed Nick that he had terminated their relationship with their attorney after serving Nick with the divorce decree, notifying him by registered mail. Nick admitted that he hadn't checked his mail yet. Harry characterized the situation as a significant problem, while Frank likened it to a widespread disaster. Harry then requested Frank to begin discussing the matter. On Monday morning, Mrs. Buford, accompanied by her parents, went to the old homestead. They hadn't removed the outside camera in time. Upon seeing the vacant lot, she had a complete breakdown, falling to her knees, sobbing, and curling into a fetal position. Her tantrum escalated with kicking and screaming, similar to a child in a late-night mall. When the equipment crew arrived, she lost her temper again. The third outburst occurred when construction workers noticed the tattoos on her face, resulting in laughter. The quality of the work was such that the text was very visible on camera, including phrases like "strumpet" and "I love phallus." Despite her raccoon eyes and duct-taped broken nose, Harry explained that, in the afternoon, Linda and a couple of lawyers from prominent firms entered his office without an appointment. After making them wait for 15 minutes, he made sure his Glock was loaded in his desk, taking advantage of Virginia laws. When the wait was over, they started berating him with talk of emergency motions, bar complaints, and contempt proceedings. He couldn't help but notice the ink all over his face, clearly written in red and blue for visibility. Once he managed to shift his focus, Harry inquired about the problem and which statement in any of the documents was false. They all stopped and looked at each other. Then he asked if there was an argument about Nick's ex committing infidelity, to which they all answered yes. Then he turned on the videotape he had prepared while they were waiting, and there was Linda, clearly engaging in closeness acts in the marital bed with someone other than her husband. It was clear they hadn't familiarized themselves with all the case files yet, as everyone just looked at each other in confusion. Harry recounted that Linda began yelling that Nick didn't give her a chance to explain, to which he responded by saying that Nick didn't care about the reason as long as it got done. Eventually, she came to her senses and started telling him that she never agreed to let Nick sell the house and that he burned her wedding dress, pictures, and album, claiming they were her personal property. Harry showed her copies of powers of attorney, one specifically for the sale of the house, and the property settlement agreement, which gave Nick discretion to dispose of her personal belongings, and told her she was lucky she still had her clothes. He then asked if she denied that her signature was on the documents, to which she replied that she did not, but claimed she never agreed to anything written in them. Harry then questioned if her entire defense was that she never read what she signed, and asked her to imagine how she would be cross-examined if she challenged anything in court. At that point, she fell silent. He also pointed to an affidavit she had signed, admitting her lover was upstairs at the moment she was signing, and asked if that was true. This caused her to lose consciousness. Despite his attempts to revive her, he eventually called emergency. She refused to go to the hospital with them, but started yelling about tattoos and her boyfriend getting torment. Harry assured her that Nick had nothing to do with it, as far as he knew, and that he was out of town anyway. Harry mentioned that Dwayne might have angered someone else's husband by sleeping with her, or another woman who thought Linda was attacking Dwayne. He informed Nick that he had told them they could discuss any criminal case they wanted to pursue with the Fairfax Police Department, and expressed regret for missing the altercation. Harry noted that things were improving and explained that they were still discussing filing a motion for reconsideration when he received an anonymous email with links to videotapes of Linda and Dwayne in Nick's bed, engaging in closeness acts in front of the Eiffel Tower. The email threatened to send the tapes to everyone Linda knows, claiming Nick was unaware and unable to prevent it. They asserted to be friends Nick had assisted, offering protection, but also threatening to expose the tapes unless Linda backed off. Nick claimed he was unaware of this. Harry mentioned that after that revelation, the individuals left without further contact, and nothing occurred at the courthouse. Harry then recounted Frank's encounter with the police, stating that detectives approached them seeking copies of the tape and the report, but then lost interest. Neither Linda nor Dwayne could recall what had happened, only that they took a cab from the airport, and Dwayne ended up hospitalized. Linda woke up in a seedy hotel, got assaulted, and ended up in the hospital. The room expenses were charged to her credit card, including room service and minibar charges. Nick mentioned that New York police and his friends had been contacted, all of whom confirmed his busy schedule in the city. Harry added that Nick's ex was reportedly undergoing laser tattoo removal in her parents' basement, which was expensive due to the extensive coverage. Nick commented on this, earning a glance from Harry and stifled laughter from Frank. Harry then brought up the condition of the individual referred to as the meat eater, stating that he was badly injured and would require extensive therapy due to multiple concussions. Finding another paralegal job might prove challenging for him, as their firm had also let them go. Harry explained that their relationship had soured during the trip, affecting the arbitration negatively. Mistakes were made, exhibits weren't ready, and witness notes were lost, leaving the client displeased. Sacrifices were made to retain future work. Frank suggested that someday Nick would have to enlighten them about something, to which Nick responded jokingly, saying he was a Boy Scout. Frank continued, mentioning that Maggie had waited in the car and expressing a bit of envy regarding Nick's situation. They agreed to discuss further over dinner, with Nick offering to treat them for aiding his liberation. As Nick drove away, Maggie informed him that she didn't have a boyfriend, surprising him. Nick then suggested heading home, with a stop at the post office first. When asked why, Nick explained that he was checking on a friend's safety, producing a card from the glove compartment bearing a Boy Scout emblem.